Serena. My parents co-signed a $340,000 business loan in my name to fund my brother's girlfriend's boutique. They didn't ask. They didn't warn me. And when the business collapsed 6 months later, the debt collectors didn't call her. They called me. My family thought I'd absorb it the way I always had, quietly, completely, without making anyone feel bad about it. They were wrong. The morning I found out started like every other Tuesday. I was at my kitchen table in Cincinnati with a half-eaten bowl of oatmeal and my laptop open to a grant application I'd been drafting for 3 weeks. I work in nonprofit development. I write funding proposals for a living, which means I spend a lot of time making careful, precise arguments about why money should go where it goes. The irony of that is not lost on me now. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I don't know why I picked up. The woman on the other end identified herself as a collections specialist from Meridian Business Credit. She was professional, not unkind, but she had the clipped efficiency of someone who makes 40 calls a day and doesn't expect many of them to go well. She said my name, my full name. She said I had a delinquent commercial loan in the amount of $340,000, that it had been in default for 62 days, and that Meridian would be pursuing recovery through all available legal channels unless I contacted them within 5 business days. I said, I think you have the wrong person. She said she didn't. I asked for the loan account number. I wrote it down on the back of a grocery receipt because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I told her I'd call back. I hung up. My oatmeal was cold. I stared at it for a long time. I want to be honest about what happened in my body in those first few minutes because I think people assume shock feels dramatic. It doesn't. It feels like the floor becoming uncertain. Like the room is the same room, but something about the air pressure has shifted, and you can't quite remember how breathing works. I sat very still. I did not cry. I opened my laptop and navigated to the annual credit report site, the one the FTC runs, where you can pull your full credit history for free. I hadn't checked mine in about 8 months. I'd had no reason to. The page loaded. I scrolled past my student loans, paid off 2 years ago, past my car note, current, past my 2 credit cards, both in good standing, and there it was, a commercial installment loan, Meridian Business Credit. Origination date 14 months ago. Original principal $340,000. Status delinquent. My social security number. My date of birth. My name on every single line. I closed the laptop. I stood up. I walked to my bathroom and stood at the sink with the cold water running over my wrists for about a minute, which is something I do when I need to bring myself back into my body. Then I walked back to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened the laptop again. I needed to understand what exactly had been financed. I called Meridian back, got a different representative, and asked for the original loan documentation to be sent to my email address on file. They had an email address on file. It was mine, but with a character transposed Serena.h instead of Serena Holt. A typo. Or not a typo. Something close enough to pass a quick scan, but far enough that I'd never received a single statement. The PDF arrived while I was still on hold. I opened it on my phone. Holt Brantley Creative Boutique, LLC. Co-applicant, Serena Holt. That was me. Primary applicant, Melissa Crane. That was my brother's girlfriend. I set the phone face down on the table. My brother Garrett and Melissa had been together for about 3 years. She was fine. I mean that in the flattest possible way. She was pleasant at holidays, didn't cause obvious drama, laughed at the right moments. I had no strong feelings about her either direction. She had talked at various family dinners about wanting to open a clothing boutique. I remembered my mother saying it sounded exciting. I remembered my father nodding the way he does when he's already agreed to something he hasn't told you about yet. What I did not remember was anyone asking me anything. I picked the phone back up and called my mother. She answered on the first ring, which she almost never does, which told me something. Hey, sweetheart. Her voice had that particular brightness it gets when she's managing a situation rather than living in one. I said, Mom, there's a business loan in my name for Melissa's boutique. Silence. About 4 seconds of it. Then we were going to talk to you about that. I asked when. 14 months ago would have been the appropriate time, I said. Before the paperwork was signed. Before my social security number was attached to a $340,000 debt. My mother's voice shifted into a register I've known my whole life. The register that means she has already decided how this conversation ends, and she is now steering it there. Serena, you have excellent credit. Melissa's score wasn't strong enough to qualify on her own, and Garrett doesn't have the income history. We needed someone the bank would trust. You were the obvious choice. The obvious choice. The obvious choice. Not a question. Not a request. A decision they'd made in a room I wasn't in, about my financial identity without my knowledge or consent. And then they had handed Melissa my name like it was theirs to lend. I asked who had signed on my behalf. My mother said that Dad had taken care of the paperwork. I asked if she understood that was fraud. She said I was being dramatic. I did not scream. I did not cry. I said I would be in touch, and I ended the call, and then I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time, doing the kind of quiet accounting that feels less like thinking and more like finally seeing something that was always there. When I was 22, I co-signed my brother's apartment lease because his income verification didn't meet the landlord's threshold. I didn't think much of it. He was my brother. He needed help. When I was 24, my parents asked me to be the primary account holder on a family cell phone plan because I had the best credit and we'd all save money. I agreed. I paid the bill every month and they Venmo'd me their portions. Mostly. When I was 26, there was a medical bill situation with my father. A hospital stay that got complicated with insurance, and I had put $1,400 on my credit card to cover a gap while it got sorted out. It never got sorted out. It ever got sorted out. I had stopped asking about it after a while. Each of these things had felt, in the moment, like a small act of love, a favor, family helping family. But sitting there that Tuesday morning with a $340,000 delinquent loan attached to my name, I could see it clearly for the first time. These hadn't been requests. They had been rehearsals. My family had been practicing using me for years, and I had kept showing up to practice. I called in sick to work that afternoon. I pulled out a legal pad. I always think better on paper. And I started writing down every instance I could remember of my name, credit, or money being used without my full understanding of the consequences. By the time I stopped, I had 11 entries. I stared at the list. Then I wrote at the top, unauthorized use of my identity and financial standing. I underlined it twice. Then I went to bed at 7 p.m. and stared at the ceiling until about 2 a.m., which is when I realized I needed to stop waiting to feel ready and start figuring out what to do. The next morning, I drove to a UPS store and got a formal copy of my credit report printed, all 4 pages. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot and went through it line by line with a highlighter. 3 items I hadn't authorized. The business loan was the largest by far, but there were 2 others, a credit inquiry from a leasing company I'd never heard of, 18 months ago, and a small revolving account at a furniture store in my name that had a $600 balance and was current, meaning someone was paying it. I didn't know who. I took photos of every page. That afternoon, I called a woman named Sasha who I'd met at a nonprofit conference 2 years prior. She was a paralegal at a consumer protection firm in Columbus. We weren't close friends, but I'd always liked her, and I remembered she'd mentioned once that her firm handled identity theft cases. I told her what I had. She was quiet while I talked. When I finished, she said, very evenly, Serena, this is not a small situation. This is a pattern, and a pattern is different from an incident. I asked her what I should do first. She said I needed to place a credit freeze with all 3 bureaus immediately, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, so that nothing new could be opened in my name. She said I needed to file a dispute with Meridian directly, attaching a statement that I had not authorized the loan. She said I should also file a report with the FTC's identity theft portal, identitytheft.gov, which would generate an official recovery plan. She said this was separate from and did not replace filing a police report if I chose to go that route. I asked if she could recommend someone. She gave me the name of an attorney, Harper Reeves, a consumer protection and financial fraud specialist at a small firm in downtown Cincinnati. She said Harper was meticulous and had handled family fraud cases before. She said, just be prepared. When the fraud comes from inside the family, it gets complicated because the evidence is real, but so are the relationships. I called Harper's office the next morning. The intake coordinator asked me to send over whatever documentation I had before the consultation. I spent 3 hours scanning and organizing everything: the loan documents, the credit report, the screenshot of the transposed email, the legal pad with my timeline. I sent it all. The day before my appointment with Harper, my brother called. I hadn't spoken to him since I'd called my mother, and I hadn't reached out. He called on a Wednesday evening when I was eating leftover soup and watching nothing in particular on television. I answered because I didn't want to not answer. I didn't want him to think I was afraid of the conversation. He started with, "Mom told me you're upset." I said I wasn't upset. I said I was taking legal steps. He exhaled that particular exhale that means he's about to explain something to me. He said, "Serena, you don't understand how hard Melissa worked on this. The boutique didn't make it. Yeah, but that's business. It was a risk, and it didn't pay off. That happens." I said it didn't happen to me. It happened in my name. He said I was making it about me when it had nothing to do with me. I sat very still on my couch holding the phone. I wanted, briefly, to throw it across the room. Instead I said, "Garrett, there is a $340,000 delinquent loan attached to my social security number. That is, by definition, something to do with me." He said Mom and Dad were handling it. I asked what that meant. He said they were working on a payment arrangement. I said, "With who?" "The bank is calling me." "Not them, me, because it's in my name." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've always been the responsible one. You know how to deal with this stuff, we don't." I heard it so clearly in that moment, the compliment used as a trap. You're capable, so you can handle it. You're strong, so it won't break you. You're the responsible one, so carry this too. I had let that framing define my role in this family for 31 years, and I was done. I said, "I have an attorney appointment tomorrow. Please make sure Mom and Dad know that." I hung up. I finished my soup. I slept better that night than I had in a week, which surprised me. I think it's because I had finally stopped waiting for someone to acknowledge what they'd done and started moving without them. Harper Reeves was a small woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and an expression that I can only describe as precise. She had reviewed everything I sent before I arrived. Her office smelled like coffee and old paper. She didn't waste time. She said, "What they did is textbook unauthorized use of your identity for financial gain. Your father signing your name on that loan application is forgery. The fact that it was done by family members doesn't change the legal classification. It changes the prosecution strategy, but not the underlying offense." I asked what my options were. She laid them out systematically. I could dispute the loan with Meridian directly, arguing fraudulent origination and demand removal from my credit. I could file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I could pursue civil litigation against my parents and/or Melissa Crane for damages. I could file a criminal report with the police. Each path had its own timeline, its own costs, its own probabilities. She didn't push me toward any of them. She just told me what they were. I asked, "If I go through the dispute process and Meridian removes it from my credit, is that enough? Does the problem go away?" She said, "Legally, the problem becomes manageable, but you have 3 other inquiries and accounts to address, and you have a family that has demonstrated a willingness to do this more than once. Unless something changes, this will happen again." I drove home in the rain, thinking about that word, demonstrated. 2 days later, something happened that shifted everything. I had posted nothing about any of this on social media. I had told no one except Sasha and Harper. But I got a DM on Instagram from a woman named Ren, the name registered faintly, Ren Calloway, an ex of my brother's from about 4 years back. She'd been before Melissa. They had dated for nearly 2 years, and the breakup had not been graceful. The message said, "Hi, Serena. I'm sorry to reach out like this. I saw your brother announced his engagement on Facebook, and I need to tell someone, and I think you should know. When Garrett and I were together, he put a utility account and a cell phone line in my name without asking. I found out when they went to collections. I tried to tell your parents. Your mom told me I was confused and that I should be careful about accusing people of things I couldn't prove. I believed her. I let it go. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I read the message 3 times. Then I screenshot it, saved it to my cloud, emailed it to Harper, and texted Ren, "Thank you. This matters more than you know. Can I call you?" She said yes. We talked for an hour that evening. She was steady, factual, not dramatic. She had documentation, a collections notice, a screenshot of the account that had been opened in her name. She had never filed a report because she hadn't known it was something she could do, and because my family had made her feel like she was the problem. I told her I was working with an attorney. I asked if she'd be willing to provide a statement. She said yes, without hesitating. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my apartment for a while. The thing about learning that this happened to someone before you is that it does 2 things simultaneously. It confirms that you are not crazy, and it confirms that you were never going to be the last. Garrett and my parents hadn't stumbled into this with me. They had practiced it on Ren, refined it, and then applied it more boldly. The scale had simply increased. I sent Harper the full message thread and Ren's contact information. Then I opened my email and sent Meridian Business Credit a formal dispute notice following the template Harper had provided. Subject line: Notice of unauthorized account, fraudulent origination. I attached the loan documents, my government-issued ID, a signed statement asserting I had not authorized the loan, and a request that all collection activity be paused, pending investigation. I hit send. The clock on my microwave said 11:17 p.m. I made chamomile tea. I had, for the first time in 10 days, a specific and grounded sense of forward motion. The response from Meridian came 4 business days later. They had opened a formal fraud investigation. They had temporarily halted collection activity on my account. They requested a notarized affidavit and any supporting documentation of fraud. They specifically mentioned that corroborating witness statements could be submitted. The same week I received a call from my mother. Her voice had changed. Not contrite, exactly. My mother does not do contrite easily, but something had deflated. She sounded like a person who has realized the performance is over. She said, "Serena, your father and I have talked. We want to make this right." I asked what that looked like to her. She said they could take over the payments on the loan, that they'd work out an arrangement with Melissa. I said, "Mom, my name is on a $340,000 loan that is already 60 days delinquent. My credit score has dropped significantly. I've spent 2 weeks and several $100s in legal fees addressing something you did without my knowledge. Taking over payments doesn't undo the damage." Silence. I said, "I need you to be honest with me about one thing. Was this the first time?" Another silence. Longer. She said, "Garrett has needed a lot of help over the years." I said I needed a yes or a no. She said, "No." It was not the first time. I thanked her for being honest. I told her my attorney would be in touch about next steps. I hung up. I didn't fall apart. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect a revelation like that to produce some kind of collapse. It didn't. It produced a strange, clear, aching calm. The kind that comes when you've suspected something for a long time and finally stop having to wonder. The following week, I went to my parents' house for the first time since all of this had started. Not to confront them. Harper had advised me to limit direct conversation, but because I had something I needed to return. 3 years ago, when my brother and Melissa first announced they were serious, my mother had given me a framed photo from my apartment. It was a family portrait from a beach vacation in the Outer Banks, the 5 of us, my parents, Garrett, Melissa, and me. My mother had said she wanted me to feel like Melissa was already family. I had put it on my bookshelf. I hadn't thought much about it. When I took it down to pack a few weeks earlier, preparing to reorganize my apartment, which was what I did when I needed to feel control over something, I flipped it over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, the Holt family, complete. And then below that in pencil, lighter almost. Almost. I was the almost. I put the photo in a paper bag and drove to my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. My mother answered the door. My father sat in the living room. Garrett was there, which I hadn't expected. Melissa was not. No one said anything particularly useful. My father said he was sorry things had gotten to this point. My brother said he hoped I understood how much pressure he'd been under. My mother offered me coffee. I set the paper bag on the entryway table. Inside was the photo, face down, along with a printed copy of Ren's statement, the credit report with all 3 unauthorized items highlighted, and the correspondence from Meridian confirming the fraud investigation. I said, "You should have these. My attorney has copies of everything." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lecture anyone. I turned around and drove home in the low October light with the windows cracked, and I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt like myself, which was something I hadn't felt inside that house in a very long time. The process that followed was not fast and it was not clean. These things rarely are. Meridian's investigation took 11 weeks. During that time, the collection activity remained paused. Harper filed the necessary documentation with all 3 credit bureaus, flagging the loan as disputed. Ren provided her written statement as a corroborating account of a pattern of behavior. In the end, Meridian voided the loan's association with my name, citing fraudulent origination. My credit report was updated. My score began to recover. Harper sent a formal demand letter to my parents regarding the other items, the furniture account, the credit inquiry, both of which were addressed and removed within 30 days. She also sent a letter to Melissa Crane's attorney noting that Meridian would be pursuing the balance of the loan through her as the primary business applicant, since my association had been legally severed. My parents did not fight any of it. I think by then they were tired. Or maybe they understood, finally, that I was not going to absorb this one. That the version of me who would have quietly taken on the debt, managed it, and never made anyone feel bad about it. That woman had made her last appearance. I want to tell you what it actually felt like, because I think when people hear a story like this, they imagine a clear before and after. The fraud, and then the resolution. The villain, and then the reckoning. Real life is messier than that. My brother got engaged 2 months after all of this. My mother sent me a save the date. I stared at the envelope for a long time before I opened it. I have not decided yet what I will do about the wedding. I may go, I may not. What I know is that the decision will be mine, made for reasons that have to do with what I actually want, not with what I owe anyone or what they'll think of me if I say no. That's new. What I have decided is where I live now. I moved in January, a smaller apartment in the neighborhood I'd always liked but told myself I couldn't afford because I was, at any given time, quietly covering something for someone else. Turns out when you stop doing that, you can afford more than you thought. The apartment has a balcony that looks out over a courtyard where someone planted a dogwood tree. It blooms in April. I drink my coffee out there in the mornings and I don't answer my phone until I'm ready. A few weeks after I settled in, I was unpacking the last box, the one that always has the miscellaneous things you don't know where to put, and I found a notebook from college. The cover said Serena Holt in my own handwriting, big and deliberate, the way I used to write my name when I was 20 and thought there was something worth announcing in it. I sat on the floor and held it for a minute. They had used that name like a tool, like something interchangeable and convenient, a signature that could be practiced, a credit score that could be leveraged, a reliability that could be borrowed against indefinitely. They had assumed I would keep showing up to the drafts they signed on my behalf, that I would be the last line of their financial contingency plan forever. But a name is not a resource. It is not a blank check or a backup plan or a favor waiting to be called in. I set the notebook on my desk. I made coffee. I opened my laptop and started working on a grant proposal for a mentorship program for first-generation college students. The kind of work I do because I believe that how resources are distributed matters, that who gets access to opportunity matters, that no one should have to give up what belongs to them just because the people around them find it convenient. The dogwood outside hadn't bloomed yet, but the buds were there, small and tight and waiting. So was I. I've thought a lot about what made any of this possible in the first place. Not the forgery, not the loan. Those were symptoms. What made it possible was something quieter and older. I had spent years being so reliable that the people closest to me stopped asking and started assuming. That's not a compliment dressed up as a character flaw. It's just what happens when you never say no, when you absorb the cost of everyone else's decisions without naming what it costs you. You don't become trustworthy in their eyes. You become available. There's a difference, and I wish someone had helped me see it sooner. The thing about Garrett is that he didn't wake up one day and decide to be a predator. I don't think that's how most of this works. It starts smaller. A co-signed lease, a cell phone plan, a medical bill left unreturned. Each one is just barely justifiable on its own. Each one gets filed under family, helps family. And somewhere in that accumulation, a line gets crossed so gradually that by the time you're looking at a $340,000 debt in your name, the people who put it there genuinely cannot understand why you're making it a problem. They've been practicing the logic for years. You have good credit. You're the responsible one. You weren't using it for anything. What I know now is that every choice has a weight that eventually lands somewhere. My parents chose convenience over honesty over and over for years. Garrett and Melissa chose to build something on a foundation that wasn't theirs to use. And for a long time I chose silence, not out of weakness, but out of a belief that keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family. It wasn't. Keeping the peace just meant absorbing the damage alone. Ren taught me something without meaning to. She had done the same thing I did, absorbed it, believed them when they said she was confused, let it go because making it a thing felt harder than swallowing it, and nothing changed because of her silence. The behavior found a new target. That's the part that stays with me. Silence doesn't protect anyone except the person doing the harm. There's a version of this story where I feel sorry for my parents, and honestly, some days I do. Not for what they lost, the control, the assumption that I'd keep showing up, but for what they never understood, that a person's name, their credit, their financial standing is not a family resource. It belongs to them. It was built by their choices, their discipline, their labor. Taking it without asking isn't creative problem solving. It's a kind of erasure. You're saying without words that this person's individual existence is less important than our collective need. What I try to hold on to now is this: I did not have to become loud to be heard. I did not have to explode or beg or spend years in a courtroom screaming about what was done to me. I just had to stop absorbing it. I had to get a credit freeze, find an attorney, document the pattern, and refuse to make it easier for them to continue. The moment I stopped being the soft place for the consequences to land, the whole structure became visible for what it was. That apartment balcony, the dogwood tree, the coffee I drink alone in the morning before I answer anyone's calls. None of that is small. I used to tell myself I couldn't afford a life that was actually mine. Turns out I just couldn't afford it while I was quietly funding everyone else's.